Okay, so today we're really going to deep dive into incident response. Um, and it's one of those things that sounds kind of straightforward, but when you really get into it, it's a pretty complex beast.
Yeah, it really is. It's a lot more than just putting out fires, as they say. You gotta know how to prevent them, how to detect them, how to respond, how to recover, the whole nine yards.
So let's break it down. What exactly does an incident responder do?
Well, at its core, incident response is about minimizing the damage and disruption caused by a security incident. And that involves a whole life cycle of activities, starting with preparation, then moving to detection and analysis, containment, eradication, and finally recovery.
So it's not just about reacting to a breach, it's about having a proactive plan in place before anything even happens.
Exactly. Preparation is absolutely crucial.
Okay, so what does that preparation phase look like?
Well, it involves things like creating and regularly updating incident response plans, establishing communication protocols, and ensuring the right tools and resources are in place.
So it's about having a solid playbook ready to go and a team that knows exactly what to do when the alarm bells start ringing.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so let's say an incident does occur. What happens next?
That's when we move into the detection and analysis phase. Incident responders need to quickly identify that something's wrong, and this often involves monitoring security logs, analyzing network traffic, investigating suspicious activity.
So they're sifting through mountains of data, looking for those telltale signs of a breach.
Precisely.
Okay, so they've detected something suspicious. What happens then?
The next step is containment. This is all about limiting the damage and preventing the attack from spreading further. It might involve isolating affected systems, disabling compromised accounts, or blocking malicious traffic.
So it's like damage control, stopping the bleeding before it gets any worse.
Exactly. And once the situation is stabilized, the focus shifts to eradication. This involves removing the threat entirely from the environment. This could include deleting malware, cleaning up infected systems, and resetting compromised accounts.
It's not enough to just contain the threat. You have to completely eliminate it.
Precisely. And the final phase is recovery. This is where systems and data are restored to their pre-incident state, and business operations are brought back online. And this can be a complex and time-consuming process, especially if critical data was affected.
This entire process sounds incredibly complex and technical. Can you give us some real-world examples of how this plays out?
Sure, let's consider a scenario where an attacker gains access to a network through a phishing email.
Okay, so phishing. That's where someone tricks a user into clicking a malicious link or downloading a malicious file. Right.
Exactly. And once they have access, they might start exploring the network, looking for valuable data or systems to compromise.
So they're essentially on a reconnaissance mission?
Yes. And they might use various tools and techniques to achieve their goals, like exploiting vulnerabilities, escalating privileges, or moving laterally to other systems.
And how would an incident responder detect and respond to this type of attack?
Well, let's say the organization has an EDR solution in place.
That's endpoint detection and response, right?
Exactly. The EDR solution might detect suspicious activity on a particular endpoint, like unusual processes running or communication with known malicious servers. This would trigger an alert, which would then be investigated by the incident response team.
So it's like an alarm system going off, alerting the security team to a potential breach.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so let's say they confirm it's a real attack. What happens next?
The incident response team would follow their established plan, which might involve isolating the affected endpoint, disabling the compromised user account, and analyzing the malware to understand its capabilities.
So they're containing the threat, preventing it from spreading, and gathering more information about the attacker's tools and tactics.
Exactly. And this might involve collaborating with other teams, like IT, legal, and communications, to ensure a coordinated response.
Incident response is really a team effort.
Absolutely.
It's not something you can do in isolation.
Right.
So they've contained the immediate threat, investigated the incident, and now they need to clean up the mess and prevent it from happening again.
Exactly. They might need to re-image the affected endpoint, restore data from backups, patch vulnerabilities, and implement stronger security controls to prevent similar attacks in the future.
It's like a cycle of containment, eradication, and recovery.
That's a good way to think about it. And throughout the entire process, documentation is crucial. Incident responders need to keep detailed records of their actions, findings, and recommendations.
So it's not just about reacting in the moment, it's also about learning from the experience and improving their defenses for the future.
Precisely. Incident response is a continuous learning process. Every incident provides an opportunity to refine their processes, enhance their tools, and strengthen their overall security posture.
This all makes perfect sense, but I'm still curious about what a typical day looks like for an incident responder. It sounds like a really dynamic and unpredictable role.
It definitely is. No 2 days are the same, but there are some common tasks and challenges that they face regularly. It definitely keeps you on your toes. You never know what each day is going to throw at you.
So let's paint a picture here. Let's say it's a Monday morning and our incident responder walks into the office, coffee in hand. What's the first thing on their to-do list?
Well, the first thing they'd probably do is check the security dashboards and monitoring systems. Make sure everything's running smoothly, see if any alerts popped up overnight.
And what kind of things would trigger a red flag on those dashboards?
Oh, it could be anything from a spike in failed login attempts to unusual network traffic patterns, or maybe an alert from their EDR system indicating a potential malware infection.
So anything out of the ordinary that might signal an attack?
Precisely.
Okay, so let's say they spot an alert. It says there's a potential intrusion attempt.
Hmm.
What happens next?
Well, first, they need to triage that alert, figure out how serious it is, and prioritize their response accordingly.
So not all alerts are created equal.
Right. Some are more urgent than others.
Okay, so let's say they've triaged the alert and it's definitely a high priority threat. What do they do then?
Time to gather more information. They'll dig into the logs, review network traffic, and examine any affected systems, basically trying to get a clear picture of what happened.
So they're putting on their detective hats and starting the investigation, trying to answer those key questions like, how did the attacker get in? What systems were affected and what data was compromised?
Yeah, that's the gist of it.
And this investigation involves a lot of technical analysis, right?
Oh, absolutely. They might use forensic tools to examine system memory, analyze malware samples, or trace network connections.
It's a highly specialized skill set.
For sure.
So they've investigated the incident, gathered the evidence. Now they need to contain the threat before it spreads any further.
Right. Containment is key. This could involve isolating affected systems, disabling compromised user accounts, blocking malicious IP addresses, whatever it takes to stop the attacker in their tracks.
So it's like building a digital wall around the compromised area.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
And I imagine this phase can be pretty stressful, especially if critical systems are affected.
Oh, absolutely. The pressure is definitely on to act quickly and decisively.
Okay, so they've contained the threat. Now what?
Now comes the eradication phase. This means completely removing the threat from the environment.
So not just patching things up, but making sure the attacker's totally gone.
Exactly. This could involve removing malware, cleaning up infected systems, resetting compromised accounts, whatever is necessary to ensure the threat is completely eliminated.
The threat is gone. Now what?
Now comes the recovery phase. This involves restoring systems and data to their pre-incident state and getting business operations back online as quickly and safely as possible.
So they're rebuilding the damaged areas and making sure everything is functioning as it should be?
Yeah, essentially.
And throughout this entire process, I imagine documentation is critical.
Absolutely. Every step of the way needs to be documented.
So they can track the progress of the investigation,
Mm-hmm.
provide evidence if needed, and learn from the experience to improve their defenses in the future.
Right. It's all about continuous improvement.
This all sounds incredibly thorough, but I'm sure there are challenges that come up along the way.
Oh, for sure. One of the biggest challenges is the sheer volume of data they have to deal with. Modern networks generate a ton of logs and alerts. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
It sounds overwhelming.
It can be. That's why automation and orchestration are so important these days.
So using technology to help them manage the workload.
Exactly.
But even with the best tools, the human element is still crucial, right?
Oh, absolutely. You still need human expertise to make those critical decisions.
Technology can help analyze data and identify patterns, but it can't replace human intuition and judgment.
Precisely.
So incident responders need to be able to think critically, analyze the evidence, and make those tough calls based on their experience and understanding of the attacker's tactics.
Exactly.
It sounds like a demanding role.
It is, but it's also incredibly rewarding.
Okay, so we've talked about the process, the challenges, the skills involved, but I'm still curious about what a typical day actually looks like for an incident responder. Can we walk through a hypothetical scenario?
Sure. Let's imagine it's a Tuesday morning, and our incident responder, let's call her Sarah, arrives at her desk with a fresh cup of coffee.
All right, Sarah's on the scene. What's first on her agenda?
First things first, She checks her security dashboards and monitoring systems, just a routine check to see if anything's out of the ordinary. And that's when she sees it, a high severity alert from the EDR system.
Uh-oh, sounds like trouble.
The alert says a suspicious process was detected on one of the company's servers, and it's exhibiting behavior consistent with a ransomware infection.
Ransomware, that's a nightmare scenario.
It can be. Sarah knows this is a serious threat that needs immediate attention.
So what does she do?
First, she isolates the affected server from the network. Can't let that ransomware spread. And then she disables the compromised user account that the attacker seems to be using.
So she's containing the threat as quickly as possible.
Exactly.
What's next?
Now she needs to gather more information. She dives into the EDR logs to see what the ransomware has been up to.
So she's trying to understand the attacker's movements. What files have been encrypted, what servers they've communicated with.
Actually,
She's basically piecing together the puzzle.
that's a good way to put it.
Okay, she's got the evidence. Now what?
Time to call in the cavalry. She documents her findings and escalates the incident to her manager and the rest of the incident response team.
So it becomes a team effort.
Absolutely.
They review the evidence and decide how to proceed.
Exactly.
So what's the plan of attack?
They activate their ransomware incident response plan. This plan outlines all the steps they need to take to eradicate the threat, recover their data, and notify the appropriate authorities.
So they have a predefined playbook for dealing with this specific type of attack.
Right. It helps ensure a coordinated and efficient response.
So what are some of the key steps in that plan?
Well, first and foremost, they need to eradicate the ransomware from the environment.
So completely remove the infection.
Exactly.
How do they do that?
There are a few options. They might use anti-malware tools, restore from backups, or even rebuild infected systems from scratch.
So they're making sure every trace of the ransomware is gone.
Exactly.
Then, of course, they need to recover their data.
Right, that's the next priority.
And how do they do that?
Ideally, they have recent and reliable backups that they can restore from. But if the backups are compromised or unavailable, they might have to consider other options.
Like what?
Well, sometimes they might have to negotiate with the attacker.
Negotiate with the attacker. That sounds risky.
It can be. It's a complex decision, and there's no easy answer.
It depends on the specific circumstances.
Exactly.
So let's say in this case, Sarah and her team are able to restore their data from backups. What happens next?
Well, once the data is restored, they need to thoroughly test and validate it.
Make sure everything is there and it's not corrupted.
Right. And then they need to take steps to prevent this from happening again.
So patching vulnerabilities, strengthening security controls, training users on how to spot phishing emails.
Yep, all of that.
So it's not just about reacting to the attack, it's about learning from it and improving their defenses for the future.
Absolutely. Every incident is a learning opportunity.
So even though the immediate crisis has been averted, Sarah's day is far from over.
Not even close. Incident response is a marathon, not a sprint.
This has been a really eye-opening look at what incident responders do.
It's a challenging but rewarding field.
So what's the key takeaway for our listeners today?
I think the biggest takeaway is that incident response is everyone's responsibility. We all have a role to play in protecting our organizations from cyber threats.
Wow, that ransomware scenario really got my heart racing. It's amazing how incident responders like Sarah have to think on their feet and make those split-second decisions.
Yeah, they're under a lot of pressure to contain the damage and get things back to normal as quickly as possible.
So we've talked about the process, the challenges, the skills. But I'm curious about the actual tools and technologies that incident responders use. What's in their toolkit?
Well, there's a whole range of tools and technologies, but some of the most common ones include SIEM systems.
SIEM. That stands for Security Information and Event Management, right?
That's right.
And what do those do?
They collect and analyze security logs from across the entire network. So it's like having a central command center where you can see everything that's going on.
That sounds incredibly useful.
It is. It helps incident responders identify patterns, anomalies, and potential threats that they might otherwise miss.
And what about EDR? We talked about that earlier. Endpoint detection and response?
Right. EDR is another essential tool. It provides deep visibility into endpoint activity, so you can see what's happening on individual devices.
So it's like having a security guard stationed on each computer.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
And together, SIEM and EDR provide a pretty comprehensive view of the security environment.
Absolutely. And then there are a bunch of other tools they might use as well, like forensic analysis software, malware analysis, sandboxes, network monitoring tools. The list goes on.
It's a constantly evolving toolkit.
It has to be. The threat landscape is always changing, so incident responders need to stay ahead of the curve.
So it's not just about having the right tools, it's also about having the right skills and mindset.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Technical skills are obviously important, but you also need critical thinking, problem solving, and communication skills.
Communication. Why is that so important?
Well, incident response is rarely a solo effort. You're often working with different teams, both internally and externally.
So you need to be able to explain technical concepts to non-technical people.
Exactly. You need to be able to give clear and concise updates to stakeholders, and you need to be able to work effectively as part of a team.
So it's not just about being a tech whiz, it's also about being a good communicator and collaborator.
Precisely.
And what about the mental side of things? I imagine incident response can be a pretty stressful job.
It can be, yeah, especially when you're dealing with a major security breach. There's a lot of pressure to contain the damage and get things back to normal, so you need to be able to stay calm and focused under pressure.
It sounds like you need nerves of steel.
It definitely helps.
So what advice would you give to someone who's interested in a career in incident response?
Well, I'd say first and foremost, build a strong foundation in cybersecurity fundamentals. Learn about operating systems, networking, security tools, incident response methodologies.
Get that solid technical grounding.
Exactly. And then start getting some hands-on experience. Participate in capture the flag competitions, build your own home lab, volunteer to help with security incidents at your organization.
Get your hands dirty, so to
Yes,
speak.
and never stop learning. The cybersecurity landscape is constantly evolving, so you need to stay up to date on the latest threats and vulnerabilities.
So it's a continuous learning process.
It is.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of incident response.
It's been my pleasure.
We've learned about the process, the challenges, the tools, the skills, and most importantly, we've learned that security is everyone's responsibility.
That's right. We all have a role to play in protecting our organizations and ourselves from cyber threats.
So, to our listeners out there, stay vigilant, stay curious, and stay safe. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.